Aemon Targaryen stood in the vaulted library of the Red Keep with his head bent over a series of old scrolls, each one bearing the names and lineages of the Targaryen bloodline. The thick parchment reeked faintly of old ink and dragonfire, a scent that lingered in all the written histories kept at King's Landing. As he read and reread the carefully penned lines, a swirl of emotions churned in the pit of his stomach. He was a studious man, reserved and possessed of a quiet wisdom. He had no craving for glory or crowns, never had. But at this precise moment, the weight of his birthright pressed upon him, and he could not disregard it so easily. Maester Aemon had served as a devoted scholar of the Citadel, a man who gave counsel and sought truth. But he was also Aemon of House Targaryen, a prince by blood, and the 7 kingdoms were poised on the brink of peril, uncertain in the wake of old King Daeron's death. He recalled the day the Archmaester had tried to shield him from this burden, from the eyes of the great council that would gather to choose who would next sit the Iron Throne. For a time, Aemon had been certain that his elder brother would be the one anointed, that the mantle of kingship would not fall to him. Yet the day approached when the lords of the realm would discuss and weigh the claim of every possible Targaryen. The question could not be avoided. Did not the realm deserve the best claimant, the wisest and most just, especially after years of uncertainty and the simmering resentment of various factions? The realm muttered about the Blackfyre pretenders, bastard offshoots of the Targaryen dynasty, and as the old lines of succession blurred, it became impossible to ignore that Aemon himself was as valid a choice as any Targaryen princeling. When the letters arrived from lords both great and small, all inquiring whether Prince Aemon would present himself at court, he found himself at a crossroads. There were those who insisted that it was Aemon's duty, doubly so, given his temperament and knowledge. Others begged him to refuse the crown and preserve the neutrality of a maester's chain, lest the realm be plunged into a fresh wave of chaos. Yet in the deep of the night, alone in that same library, Aemon read treatises on kingship and monarchy. He read of the virtues of the greatest Targaryen kings, Jaehaerys the Conciliator, whose golden reign had ushered in an age of peace. He read of Aegon the Conqueror, whose iron will shaped the 7 kingdoms into one realm. There were so many shining moments to study, but also monstrous deeds and cautionary tales. He did not hunger for that seat of power, did not relish the idea of forging or breaking alliances with all eyes upon him. But a small voice, half conscience and half duty, whispered that if a good man refused to take up responsibility, then the realm might suffer under a lesser king's rule. So Aemon Targaryen stepped away from the library that night and made a decision. He would allow his name to stand as a claimant before the Great Council. Let them choose him or refuse him. He would not manipulate, bribe, or coerce. He would only demonstrate, through reason and wisdom, that he could rule justly. And if the council found him lacking, so be it. He would happily return to his service as a maester, unburdened by the weight of the crown. In truth, he hoped they would not choose him, for all the power in the world meant nothing to him beside the well-being of the people. But if he was the best man for this dire time, would it not be cowardice to turn his back? He departed the citadel and made the journey to King's Landing, each mile pulling him deeper into a swirl of complicated emotions. Upon arrival, the Red Keep was aflame with tensions and whispers. Lords of every great house and many lesser houses gathered under its great halls, jostling for position, forging alliances in corners, or gazing suspiciously at the Targaryens who remained in the capital. Viserys, Aemon's elder brother, clung fiercely to the notion that he was King Daeron's rightful successor. Another brother, a more distant cousin or two, carried themselves with arrogance and draped themselves in illusions of power. Each one seemed certain that the Iron Throne was theirs by divine right. When Aemon entered the hall, the clamor receded, replaced by a curious hush. He was not a large man, though his presence commanded respect. His silver hair was kept short, as befitted a man who had once worn the maester's chain around his neck, though he had left that chain behind at the citadel for the time being. He wore a plain black robe with the Targaryen sigil, 3-headed dragon, embroidered in muted red thread at his breast. Had he come attired in the full regalia expected of a prince, no doubt tongues would have wagged even more. Still, the effect of his presence was undeniable. Some saw a wise scholar, others saw a Targaryen who knew hidden truths, and a few saw a threat. In the days that followed, the Great Council convened, each lord giving his voice and weighing the rightful claimant. Divisions emerged between the supporters of Viserys and Aemon, for no one was entirely sure who might better serve the realm. Some suspected that Viserys, being older, was the natural choice according to tradition. Others argued that Aemon's scholarship and measured temperament were exactly the qualities needed to avert wars and manage the realm responsibly. There were rumors that some cunning lords preferred a more malleable king, someone they might control with flattery and cunning. Aemon recognized it all as the typical dance of politics, a game he had never wanted to play. When he stood before the assembled lords to speak, there was no studied performance in his manner. He simply laid out his view of kingship. It was not a right to be claimed like a piece of property, he said, but a solemn duty owed to the people. A king's duty was not merely to preside over lords and ladies, but to ensure the peasants, small folk, and all manner of folk across the realm were treated with justice and fairness. The crowd listened in respectful silence, and when he finished, it was uncertain whether he had won them over or merely shown them how differently he approached power. But as the council continued, a growing number of lords began to murmur that perhaps Aemon was indeed the best suited to the throne. He seemed less hungry for the position, and ironically that only made him appear more worthy. In the end, the Great Council returned its verdict. By a decisive margin, they named Aemon Targaryen the rightful heir, thus awarding him the Iron Throne. For a long moment after the announcement, he could only stand there in stunned silence. He had prepared himself for rejection or at best a close vote. But there it was spelled out, the realm wanted him. He accepted the decision with grace, though inside he felt a tangle of fear and uncertainty. Would he be able to bear such a burden? Would he fail them? In the hush of that hall, some lords looked to him with expectation, others with wariness. Aemon realized then he no longer had the luxury of being merely a maester. He had to be a king. The coronation took place a fortnight later. It was a modest affair in comparison to the grand pageants of Targaryen history, reflecting both Aemon's temperament and the uncertain times. He insisted that the small folk should be allowed to watch from the streets of King's Landing, to celebrate as they could, for the crown was not only for the lords. Many in the crowd were intrigued by this scholar prince. Some whispered that he would prove a weak, scholarly king. Others said that his knowledge would be the realm's saving grace. Yet as the ceremony reached its peak, and Aemon knelt to accept the crown of Aegon the Conqueror, more than a few watchers swore that a resoluteness lit his violet eyes, a quiet steel that had been hidden beneath the kind exterior. The next days were a haze of formalities and gatherings. Lords lined up to pledge fealty. The High Septon offered official blessings. Grand Maester Norrin, an older man who had served Daeron, seemed watchful of Aemon, as if uncertain how a newly crowned monarch with a maester's background would interact with the Citadel's traditions. Yet Aemon understood the significance of forging strong ties with the faith and the Citadel alike. A realm torn between church and crown often reaped only chaos. He sought to maintain peace among all parties, and soon enough, most of the realm's powers recognized him wholeheartedly. But the question of Viserys, his older brother, lingered like a ghost in the hallways of the Red Keep. Viserys had lost the council vote. Although many lords favored Aemon's wisdom, Viserys still had supporters. Some believed he was cheated, that birth order should have outweighed all else. Already, rumors spread of mutterings in Storm's End or possibly the Vale, where certain lords might gather under a disaffected Targaryen. To avert immediate strife, Aemon visited Viserys in private. He found his brother in the solar that once belonged to their grandfather King Daeron. Viserys was staring into the crackling fire with a distant look in his eyes. "You come to gloat?" Viserys said, bitterness threading his voice. "You, the maester who never wanted a throne, have won. Meanwhile You are my brother," Aemon said softly. "I would have served you if the realm had chosen you. This was never a contest of vanity for me." Viserys turned, and Aemon read the swirl of anger and sorrow on his face. "But the realm did not choose me. They spurn me in favor of you. What place is left for me here, I wonder?" Aemon hesitated, then reached out, placing a hand lightly on his brother's shoulder. "I want you by my side, if you will accept it. Rule with me, not beneath me. We must show the realm a united house, not a house divided by jealousy." Viserys did not answer at first, but his expression softened a fraction. For all his disappointment, he found it difficult to maintain hatred for Aemon, whose humility could disarm the most resentful heart. In time, Viserys nodded curtly. "I will stay, but do not expect me to always bend to your will like a meek child. If I have opinions on how best to govern, I will share them." Aemon bowed his head. "That is precisely what I hope you will do, brother." Thus did the question of Viserys' loyalty rest in an uneasy compromise. Aemon knew that the seeds of envy rarely died fully. They might lie dormant, growing in corners where men whispered conspiracies. Yet he believed that honesty and sincerity might ward off the bitterest of feelings. For a moment, it seemed that the realm might enjoy stability under this unlikely Scholar King. Aemon's first major concern was the Blackfire threat that still shadowed the Targaryen dynasty like a ghost. Decades had passed since the initial rebellion led by Demon Blackfire, but the seeds of discontent remained scattered across the continent. The Blackfires were rumored to be across the Narrow Sea, at the court of Tyrosh or perhaps the Stepstones, looking for an opportunity to reclaim what they viewed as their birthright. Aemon recognized that dealing with them required delicate measures. Instead of launching a preemptive strike or sowing fear, he turned to diplomacy, sending discreet envoys to Essos to learn more about these exiled relations. He did not want war, but neither would he allow a usurper to threaten Westeros without a response. Meanwhile, he continued to govern. The lords who came to petition him found a man who listened intently, who asked pointed questions, and who tried to apply reason to each case. One day, the Lord of Riverrun might arrive to complain of banditry on the crossroads. Next, a minor lord of the Reach might request relief from the king's taxes after a poor harvest. Aemon gave audience to them all. Though some sought to flatter him, they soon realized that flattery counted for little. Reason and sincerity mattered more to this king. The effect was slow but transformative. Many in the realm began to respect Aemon's style of rule. Some even spread hopeful talk that he might be a second Jaehaerys, a wise king who would guide Westeros to a prosperous era. But not all hearts in King's Landing were so quick to warm. Court intrigues had always thrived under the Targaryen kings, and Aemon's relative inexperience in politics presented an irresistible target for the more cunning courtiers. Whispers circulated that the new king was too bookish, that he lacked the ruthless streak a ruler needed in a land as large and fractious as Westeros. Some grumbled that his approach would never keep the Seven Kingdoms united. Bit by bit, certain powerful lords and ladies probed for weaknesses, employing bribes or half-veiled threats. Aemon, for his part, tried to see through these machinations. He kept a small circle of trusted advisors close. Viserys, who gave a more pragmatic viewpoint, Grand Maester Norrin, who provided counsel steeped in the Citadel's tradition, Lord Commander Ser Gareth Dane of the Kingsguard, a chivalrous knight with an incisive mind. And, surprisingly, Aemon frequently consulted with Rhaella Velaryon, a distant cousin of the Targaryens who was known for her sharp wit and unshakable sense of loyalty. As the moon cycles passed and turned into years, Aemon grew more secure on his throne. The day he was formerly known as Maester Aemon receded into a memory for most of the realm, though those close to him never forgot how he had come to the throne so reluctantly. Yet a king could not reign merely by reading dusty tomes and passing wise judgments. There were tours of the realm to be taken. Aemon embarked on a grand progress through the Reach and the Stormlands, speaking with small folk and highborn alike. He found that outside the capital, the people's needs were often very different from what was assumed in King's Landing. Where the King's Council might dwell upon matters of trade and alliances, the small folk worried primarily about good harvests, roads safe from brigands, and justice for wrongs inflicted by cruel local lords. In one hamlet near Summerhall, an old woman approached him directly, with no heed for protocol. She told him of a petty lord's cruelty, how the lord had seized half her family's lands without cause. She wanted the king's justice, even though others told her it was futile to rail against a lord's power. Moved by her plea, Aemon made inquiries, discovered there was merit in her story, and compelled the lord to surrender the stolen land and offer restitution. The word spread like wildfire. This new king would listen to a farmer's wife as readily as he would to a lord paramount. It garnered him a measure of love and loyalty from the small folk, though some lords took a dimmer view of such interventions, worrying that the king was undermining their authority. Still, Aemon pressed on, wanting above all to be fair. When he returned to King's Landing, however, trouble awaited him. There had been unsettling tidings from beyond the narrow sea. The Blackfyre faction seemed to be gathering. A young scion of the Blackfyre line, rumored to be Daemon's grandson, was forging alliances with Sellsword companies. They had begun to talk openly of an invasion. Aemon recognized the potential threat. He called his lords to muster, quietly preparing for war should it come. But instead of issuing a brash declaration, he reached out to envoys in Bravos, Lys, and Pentos to ascertain the truth. In a carefully worded letter, he invited the potential Blackfyre claimant to parley with him under terms of safe conduct, offering the possibility of reconciliation. Many in his council objected strongly, believing any invitation extended to a Blackfyre was tantamount to weakness. Viserys, in particular, confronted him in the council chamber one evening. "They're rebels, traitors," Viserys hissed. "This is madness. You cannot invite them to treat with you as if they were equals. It will be seen as a sign of feebleness." Aemon clasped his hands behind his back. "If they believe they have a rightful claim, let them state it plainly before the throne. Let them speak before me if they dare. I have no intention of surrendering the realm to them, but I must know what truly motivates them. If all we do is sharpen swords and prepare for war, the realm will suffer. Let us see if words can quell a potential conflict before we lose thousands of lives." Viserys' eyes flared, but he held his tongue. He respected his brother's calm approach, yet worried it would lead to a fiasco. Still, the king's will was law, and the invitation was sent with utmost secrecy and caution. No Blackfyre claimant came forward to accept the offer, nor did the realm hear any official response. Instead, Aemon began to receive intelligence that the Blackfyres were indeed gathering ships in Tyrosh, forging alliances with various Sellsword companies. War seemed inevitable. That was the moment Aemon resolved that while a peaceful resolution was ideal, he would not allow the realm to be caught unprepared. He quietly bolstered the royal fleet. He reached out to lords of the narrow sea, demanding they patrol the coasts. And he established more rigorous training among the Gold Cloaks and the garrison in King's Landing, ensuring that if the Blackfyres did strike, the capital would not be left vulnerable. During these preparations, something unexpected took place. Small folk in the Crownlands began forming militias to defend themselves against rumored invasions. Where once they might have had no interest in the monarchy's broader conflicts, they now seemed determined to protect a king who had shown them fairness and justice. Aemon was moved by their loyalty. He urged the local lords to support these militias, though with caution, so as not to arm peasants too heavily and risk future rebellions. Nevertheless, the gesture showed him that the trust he had sown was beginning to bear fruit. As the third year of his reign loomed, the tension with the Blackfyres built to a crescendo. Word arrived from Bravosi merchants that a fleet bearing the banner of the Black Dragon had set sail from the Stepstones. The new claimant styled himself Daemon III Blackfyre, proclaiming that he would retake Westeros in the name of his revered grandsire. Aemon summoned his lords to King's Landing without delay, preparing for the possibility of open conflict. Among those who answered the call was Lord Alan Valerion with his strong fleet, the Lord of Driftmark, who was rumored to have connections in Essos. House Baratheon also pledged forces, as did House Tyrell, House Martell, and others. Yet, while many answered the king's summons, a few were noticeably slow in coming, or did not come at all. Questions arose about who might betray Aemon or secretly side with the Blackfyres. Some lords, after all, might see advantage in installing a different Targaryen line on the throne, if it meant personal gain. Before the Blackfyre ships arrived, Aemon's own scouts informed him that a landing was imminent along the shores near Massey's Hook. With typical caution, Aemon formed a war council. The lords debated strategy fiercely. Some urged a swift, decisive strike to crush the invaders on the beaches before they could establish a foothold. Others cautioned that hurrying into a trap might be disastrous. Viserys, interestingly, recommended an aggressive approach, reminding them that allowing a traitor to set foot in Westeros was a grave risk. Aemon weighed both sides and ultimately decided on a measured offensive. He would place a large force near the potential landing site, while holding a strong reserve back to guard King's Landing. Should the Blackfires attempt to feint, the reserves would handle any surprise movement. The day of the battle dawned gray and cold, the sea mist rolling in thick clouds across the beach. Aemon, though not a man of war by nature, donned armor for the first time in his life. It felt heavy and cumbersome, but he had no intention of hiding in the Red Keep. He would accompany the main host. Grand Maester Norrin objected, cautioning that the king's life was too precious to risk in the field. Aemon, however, insisted that the men who fought deserved a king who did not cower behind walls. He promised to remain under heavy guard, with the king's guard at his side, but he would stand with them no matter the cost. When the Blackfire fleet appeared through the fog, their black dragons visible on tattered crimson sails, the Targaryen forces held position along the shoreline. Ser Gareth Dane, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, stood at Aemon's right hand. Viserys led a separate contingent, coordinating with House Valerion's ships to launch a naval assault if needed. For a tense hour, no one moved. Only the dull roar of the surf battered their ears. Then the first wave of longboats slid into the shallows, disgorging soldiers dressed in mismatched armors, sellswords from the free cities. Behind them came the knights bearing the black dragon banners, the heart of the Blackfire pretenders' host. Aemon felt his heart pound in his chest as he witnessed the near-endless swarm stepping onto Westerosi soil. He prayed that reason might still find a way, but he had tried that road. War was upon them. As the Blackfire lines formed on the beach, trumpets blared from the Targaryen side, and the ground shook with the charge of cavalry. King Aemon watched from atop a small rise as the clash began. Horses screaming, steel meeting steel, men shouting war cries. He forced himself to keep a steady gaze, to not flinch or look away from the horror of battle. This was the reality of kingship he had hoped to avoid, but the realm had given him no choice. He remembered old accounts of previous Blackfire rebellions, how they ended in rivers of blood. He silently vowed to end this fight quickly, to minimize the slaughter. Ser Gareth led the first wave of knights forward, clashing with the sellswords who tried to advance up the beach. The Targaryen foot soldiers held the center, their spears bristling. Volley after volley of arrows came from the sellsword ranks, but the Targaryens were well drilled, hunkering behind large shields. On the left flank, a force of Westermen clashed brutally with knights bearing the black dragon. Everywhere, the cacophony of steel, the screams of men and horses, and the crash of shield on shield filled the damp air. In the midst of this, the Black Dragon standard was sighted, Daemon III Blackfire himself, flanked by his personal guard. Rumor said he was a tall man, broad in shoulder, with Targaryen features made severe by the bitterness of exile. He spurred his horse into the fray, slashing through footmen and bellowing that he would see the usurper Aemon brought low. For a moment, the battle seemed to pivot around him, as though his presence might galvanize the sellswords into a single unstoppable surge. But that was when the Targaryen line shifted, revealing a trap. With a long horn blast, House Valerion's cavalry thundered in from the flank. They had sailed down the coast and landed behind the Blackfire position, pinning the enemy on both sides. The Blackfire host, outmaneuvered, fought like cornered beasts, desperate to break out. Daemon III tried to rally them, but confusion reigned in the smoky gloom of the battlefield. Some sellswords, realizing they were in a losing position, attempted to retreat to their ships. Others pressed forward blindly, hoping for a miracle. The Targaryen forces slowly closed the pincer, forcing the enemy ranks tighter until they could no longer maneuver. Through this swirling chaos, Aemon remained stationed on the rise, guarded by knights. He wanted to join the front lines, But Grand Maester Norrin insisted that the king must not throw his life away on the tip of a Sellsword spear. Instead, Aemon watched with a clenched jaw as Westerosi men slew each other in the shallows, the water turning a sickening red with blood. He tried to maintain a calm veneer, but inside, each scream cut at his heart. This was the cost of the crown, to preside over death in the name of preserving the realm. Finally, after nearly 2 hours of brutal fighting, the Blackfyre host broke. A ragged group fled back to their ships, trying to launch them in a hasty retreat. Others cast down weapons, surrendering to the mercy of the Targaryen knights. Daemon III Blackfyre was last seen leading a handful of loyal retainers in a desperate charge deeper inland, presumably trying to escape into the woodlands. Viserys led a company of riders to hunt him down before he could vanish and regroup. By the day's end, the beach was littered with dead and dying. Smoke from burning ships billowed across the coast, stinging the eyes of the survivors. Aemon descended from his vantage point to walk among the remnants of the battle. He paused to kneel by a mortally wounded Targaryen soldier, murmuring words of comfort before the man passed. He turned to a knight who had fought valiantly and helped him to his feet. He did not distinguish friend from foe in that moment. All around were men suffering. He instructed the maesters present to tend to the wounded, reminding them that a man who surrenders must be treated with mercy. When Viserys returned late that evening, he brought with him prisoners, including a bloodied but defiant Daemon III Blackfyre. The pretender's arm was gashed from shoulder to elbow, and his face bore a haunted fury. He glared at Aemon with undisguised hatred, calling him a false king who cowered behind walls. Aemon, however, did not rise to the insult. He merely looked upon his foe with sadness. Here was a man who believed in a claim he had inherited, just as fervently as Aemon had initially tried to refuse his own. One Targaryen bloodline pitted against another, a tragic echo of the realm's violent past. The next morning, the realm expected a grand and terrible judgment. The lords murmured that Aemon would likely execute Daemon III publicly, to send a message that the Targaryen line would not brook defiance. Viserys openly advocated for a swift beheading, to cut off the snake's head before it could strike again. But Aemon could not bring himself to order death without at least hearing the man's side. He arranged a private chamber, summoning the Blackfyre claimant. The king's guard surrounded them, but they stood at a discreet distance, giving the two men space for conversation. Daemon III's wound had been cleaned and bandaged, but it was clear he was in pain. Still, he held himself tall. "Why do you spare me?" he spat. "To gloat over your victory? To see the Blackfyres humiliated?" Aemon shook his head. "No. If I desired humiliation, I would have paraded you through the city in chains. You could not even have refused me that. But I want to speak to you, to understand why you persist in this war." "What is there to understand?" Daemon hissed, his face twisting. "Your line stole the throne from the true line of Daemon Blackfyre, the greatest warrior of his age. My family has lived in exile, scraping and bowing in foreign courts, mocked by lesser men. Westeros is our birthright, and we have come to claim it." Aemon considered his words. "You truly believe you would serve the realm better than I?" Daemon's mouth curled in disdain. "Serve the realm? I would restore its glory. I would make House Targaryen proud again. Not hide behind politics and dusty books. The realm needs strength." Aemon took a long moment to reply. In truth, Daemon's anger was fueled by a sense of injustice, by a longing for an inheritance he believed was taken from him. "I do not rule by the sword alone," Aemon said quietly. "I do not claim to be the greatest warrior in the land, nor do I think it matters. A king's duty is to serve, not to bask in glory. But if you had come to me in peace, if you had proven yourself worthy, I would have considered pardons for you and your kin. Is that so abhorrent to you? You speak as if you are the realm's father," Daemon scoffed. "I see only a weak man who sits on a stolen throne. Execute me if you wish. I will not beg." Aemon's resolve wavered. He sympathized with the tragedy of Daemon's life, but he could not ignore the carnage inflicted by his ambition. If allowed to live, Daemon might yet inspire new rebellions, and the lords who supported him might try to free him or rally to him as a figurehead. Yet, for all that, Aemon hated the idea of beheading him outright. He recalled the history of other Targaryen usurpers imprisoned or executed, their lines extinguished or forcibly vanished. Had that truly brought peace? Or had it simply sown the seeds of future hatred? At length, Aemon decided. He would lock Daemon III Blackfyre in the dungeons of the Red Keep under close watch. This satisfied neither the bloodthirsty lords who demanded a public example nor those who believed in absolute mercy. Viserys argued with him, cautioning that so long as Daemon lived, the Blackfyre cause lived. But Aemon held firm. I will not kill a man simply to make a spectacle. If he remains unrepentant, then he shall remain imprisoned, the king declared. Viserys, exasperated, could only submit to his brother's will. The realm, at first, was uneasy about the king's decision. Many whispered that King Aemon was too soft. The great houses wondered if sparing Daemon signaled weakness to potential rebels. Yet as time passed, the fear of immediate reprisal faded. The Blackfyre fleet was scattered or sunk. Their sellsword companies disbanded. Some who had surrendered were pardoned and allowed to take the Black, heading to the wall in the distant north. In that was an echo of the second chance Aemon had once given himself, the life of service, albeit in a harsh place. Gradually, the realm settled back into a tense peace. In the aftermath of the battle, Aemon grieved the loss of so many lives on both sides. He commissioned new roads in the Crownlands and the Stormlands to speed trade and communications, hoping the realm would heal more quickly from the war's scars. He established a royal hospital in King's Landing, funded by the crown, staffed by maesters who specialized in healing, so that men maimed in war could receive care. His opponents called it a waste of royal gold. But those who benefited saw it as a sign of a king who truly cared for his people, not just for the glory of House Targaryen. Over time, even some of Aemon's critics softened, particularly as the tax revenues from increased trade began to refill the royal coffers. It seemed that a wise, measured approach might yield prosperity after all. Then came a separate challenge, altogether different from the threat of rebellion. The North began to endure a series of harsh winters, each more unforgiving than the last. Reports trickled down from the wall about wildling incursions. The Night's Watch found its numbers dwindling, its resources strained. Letters arrived from the Lord Commander, begging the king for aid. Though the Watch had once been an independent order, reliant on the support of all the realms, many lords had grown lax in sending men or supplies. Aemon, recalling the vow of the Watch to guard the realm against threats from beyond the wall, resolved to help them. He summoned his council once again to discuss the matter. Viserys objected. We have our own troubles, brother. The realm is still recovering from war. The treasury, while improved, is not limitless. Why should we invest so heavily in the Night's Watch? The wildlings are a nuisance, but they do not threaten the heart of the realm. Aemon shook his head. The Night's Watch is our shield. If we let it decay, we open ourselves to dangers we cannot foresee. It is not only wildlings. There are darker tales from beyond the wall that cannot be dismissed. My studies at the Citadel taught me that the past is filled with cautionary stories. But they may be nothing more than that. Stories, Viserys countered. Aemon, however, would not yield. Stories have roots in truth. Regardless, the Watch's duty is unwavering. If we fail them now, how can we call ourselves protectors of the realm? Thus, the king decreed a royal grant to the Night's Watch, sending gold, grain, and fresh recruits to Castle Black. He also commanded that criminals sentenced in the Crownlands be offered the choice of the Black more frequently, boosting the Watch's numbers. A few lords grumbled at the expense, but Aemon soothed them by explaining that if the North were truly imperiled, they would soon be begging the crown to intervene at a far greater cost. Better to act now before a larger crisis erupted. That decision would have deep consequences, for it tied the fortunes of the crown more closely with the often-forgotten guardians in the far north. Lord Commander Roderick Pike of the Watch, upon receiving the king's envoys, thanked him profusely. He wrote a letter praising the new Targaryen king's foresight and compassion, promising that the watch would always stand firm for House Targaryen, come what may. Aemon cherished that loyalty, sensing that one day it might prove invaluable. As the years wore on, Aemon's reign saw a gradual diminishing of old rivalries. House Martell eased tensions that had simmered since the era of the conquest. House Stark, grateful for the assistance to the Night's Watch, reaffirmed bonds with the crown. Trade increased, as did the presence of foreign envoys in King's Landing, curious about this soft-spoken king who had once been a maester. Word spread across the narrow sea that King Aemon was approachable and open to forging new commercial agreements, so long as they served the realm's greater good. But while the realm prospered, Aemon's personal life proved more complicated. There was the matter of marriage, which the realm expected of a king, especially a Targaryen. Suitors and envoys flocked from every corner of Westeros and beyond. The great houses dangled their daughters before the throne, hoping to secure the ultimate match. Even a few Essosi princes from Volantis and Lys hinted at the possibility of an alliance. Aemon, uninterested in the typical pageantry of courtship, nonetheless understood that the realm expected an heir. He tried to approach this, like all things, with careful deliberation. In time, he found himself gravitating toward Rhaella Velaryon, the cousin who had long been in his trusted circle. She was a woman of intelligence and kindness, with a keen political sense that frequently aided him in dealing with foreign envoys. Rhaella understood him in a way few others did, respecting his scholarly temperament without urging him to become a different man. Yet, for a while, Aemon hesitated to bind them in marriage. Were his feelings genuine, or was he simply close to her because she was one of the few people in court who treated him as an equal? The question gnawed at him until the day he finally spoke to her in private, in the garden of the Red Keep, amid the sweet scent of lemon trees. "Rhaella, you have been a dear friend and advisor to me," he began, feeling uncharacteristically shy. "The realm expects that I wed, and I cannot deny their reasons. But I do not wish to marry for the sake of political convenience alone." Her silver eyes flicked to his. "Nor do I, and I will speak plainly. We have always understood each other, you and I. Though we have never spoken of it, I value your mind, your compassion. You do not treat me as a pawn or a trophy." He exhaled, relief coloring his voice. "Then is it your wish that we join our houses in matrimony?" She inclined her head with a soft smile. "It is my wish to stand at your side, as partner and queen." They wed in a small ceremony by Targaryen standards, though still lavish by the reckoning of lesser lords. The bells of the city rang out, and small folk cheered in the streets, for they had grown fond of King Aemon and the notion that he might produce an heir to maintain stability in the realm. Rhaella was crowned queen, and soon the realm sang songs of the gentle scholar king and his wise queen, forging a new golden age in memory of Jaehaerys and Alysanne. The couple did not chase such lofty comparisons, but they did try to emulate the virtues of that storied reign. They traveled together frequently, listening to the people's concerns, forging or renewing alliances. When Rhaella later gave birth to a daughter, Princess Alina, the realm rejoiced at the promise of continued stability. All the while, Daemon III Blackfyre languished in the Red Keep's dungeon. Even after he recovered from his wounds, the king refused to either execute or free him, leaving him in a limbo of sorts. Some might consider that a cruelty, others a mercy. Occasionally, Aemon would send a maester to check on him, ensuring he was not mistreated. Daemon responded with cold silence. He would not beg for release, nor would he renounce his claim. Over time, the Great Council's choice to enthrone Aemon seemed vindicated. A land once rife with simmering tensions was slowly stitched together by roads, fair dealings, and a king who genuinely sought justice. Yet no reign is ever free of storms. The Seven Kingdoms are vast, and new troubles always lurk in the shadows. 5 years into his rule, Aemon received tidings of an outbreak of the Grey Plague in Old Town, an affliction that had not been seen in a generation. The Citadel quarantined entire districts, fearful that it might spread throughout the realm. The old Aemon, the Maester, felt compelled to act. The new Aemon, the king, was in a position to do so decisively. He dispatched an entire train of wagons carrying medicinal supplies to Old Town, along with skilled healers. He authorized funds for the High Septon to transform the Starry September into a temporary hospice, under the guidance of the Maesters. The result was that the disease was contained more swiftly than many had feared, averting a realm-wide catastrophe. This success only bolstered his reputation, and for a while, peace prevailed across the land. Yet peace can lull men into complacency, and ambition does not die easily. In certain corners of the realm, quiet conspiracies brewed. Lords who had grown used to the old ways, where a strong king bent them to his will through force or fear, found Aemon's approach baffling, and in their confusion they wondered if they might push boundaries. One such lord was Lord Walter Sunglass, a minor bannerman in the Crownlands who controlled a modest stretch of coastline. Over several years, he ceased paying his taxes in full, quietly amassing a personal treasury. Aemon heard whispers of Sunglass raising private men-at-arms in unusual numbers. Alarmed, he confronted Lord Walter's envoy in the Red Keep, demanding an explanation. The envoy obfuscated, claiming bandits threatened Lord Walter's land, hence the armed men. Aemon sent a discreet investigation team, which discovered no signs of bandits, only the suspicious construction of new fortifications. When Aemon pressed the matter, Lord Walter responded with a letter accusing the king of tyranny for questioning a loyal bannerman. Viserys saw in that letter the seeds of rebellion and urged an immediate show of force. Aemon, determined to avoid bloodshed if possible, sent a formal summons for Lord Walter to appear at court and account for his actions. The Lord refused. This was open defiance. Reluctantly, Aemon gathered a royal force. He had learned from the Blackfyre conflict that letting such issues fester only invited greater danger. In a short campaign, the royal forces marched upon Sunglass's lands. They found the newly built fortifications, but Walter's men were unprepared for a disciplined royal host. A brief siege and a single battle later, Walter's men surrendered, their lord forced to kneel before the king. Aemon, though angered by the duplicity, was not eager to execute. Instead, he stripped Walter of his lordship, exiled him to the Night's Watch, and put Sunglass lands under the stewardship of the next rightful heir, Walter's younger brother, a man of more even temper. Some lords applauded the decision as just and swift, while others believed it set a dangerous precedent of dethroning a lord without offering him a second chance. Aemon quietly noted that he had indeed offered a second chance. Walter had refused even to come to court and speak. That concluded the Sunglass affair, but it served as a reminder that peace must be maintained, not simply wished for. Aemon learned to be vigilant. He formed a network of informants who would keep him apprised of any suspicious lords or creeping rebellions. The king had seen enough bloodshed to prefer negotiation, but he would not allow traitors to set the realm aflame. It was a delicate balance, one that weighed heavily on his conscience each night. As more years passed, King Aemon grew in experience and confidence. He fathered another child with Queen Riella, a son named Baelor, who from infancy showed signs of a curious mind similar to his father's. The realm watched as the royal children grew, hoping that this new generation of Targaryens might usher in an era free of the internal strife that had plagued the dynasty. At tournaments, knights spoke of the day Prince Baelor would tilt in the lists. Musicians composed ballads praising Princess Elena's gentility. The royal family often presented themselves to the public in King's Landing, showing a level of accessibility that endeared them to the common folk. Yet not all hearts in the realm were content. Daemon III Blackfyre remained a prisoner, and abroad, in the free cities, the exiled remnants of his supporters doubtless dreamt of a day they might free him. Some lords still begrudged Aemon's approach to governance, resenting his interventions in local disputes. And from time to time, disturbing whispers surfaced. Accounts of unnatural sightings beyond the wall, rumors of the old powers awakening. The Night's Watch, bolstered though it was by Aemon's support, reported occasional skirmishes with wildlings that carried unsettling undertones. Even so, these rumors received little serious attention in the comfortable courts of the south. In the 14th year of his reign, Aemon was tested again by unforeseen tragedy. Word reached King's Landing that a massive fire had consumed part of Harrenhal, that cursed fortress by the god's eye. Many who dwelled there lost their lives, and the region's new lord, Lord Heron Towers, was among the dead. The cause of the fire was unknown. Some blamed negligence, others whispered of curses, and a few even suggested sabotage by unknown agents. Determined to prevent chaos from spreading in the Riverlands, Aemon traveled north with a small retinue to assess the damage firsthand and bring aid. He found Harrenhal and ashen ruin in places. Smoke still drifted from smoldering beams, and the stench of burned flesh lingered in the air. Ser Gareth Dane and Queen Riella accompanied the king, carefully navigating the fallen stones. Local peasants gathered anxiously, fearful and uncertain. Many were homeless, and the harvest was at risk of rotting in the fields because laborers were dead or scattered. Aemon quickly allocated resources, ordering engineers to shore up the damaged sections of the keep, and distributing gold from the royal treasury to help the people rebuild. He also sought out survivors who might shed light on what truly happened. A woman with a bandaged arm claimed she had seen torches thrown into the stable house by masked men. Another man insisted the stables caught fire accidentally and spread. Yet another whispered that the ghost of Heron the Black walked the halls, setting them ablaze in a supernatural fury. Aemon tried to parse the facts from rumor, concluding that sabotage was likely. But who would benefit from chaos at Harrenhal? He thought again of conspirators who might wish to destabilize the realm, but no obvious suspects emerged. Perhaps it was only a local grievance. The king left behind a contingent of men to keep order in the region, naming a temporary castellan until the rightful heir could be determined. That done, he returned to King's Landing. In his wake, rumors of curses and haunting only grew, but no further evidence of sabotage emerged. If it had been a targeted attack, the culprit went undetected, leaving an unsettling riddle behind. The years flowed onward. Aemon, now deep into his reign, began to feel the relentless toll of kingship. The burdens of his decisions weighed upon him more heavily each day. His hair, once a youthful silver, grew streaks of white. Lines creased his brow. Yet, for all the weariness, he had the satisfaction of seeing the Seven Kingdoms largely at peace. Small councils continued to advise him. Grand Maester Norrin, well into old age, offered consistent if cautious guidance. Ser Gareth Dane still led the Kingsguard with unwavering loyalty, though a new generation of knights now served alongside him. Viserys had matured over the years, burying some of his old resentments, and proven a capable hand of the king. Riella remained at Aemon's side, providing comfort in dark moments, challenging him to act when he might otherwise delay. Their children, Princess Alina and Prince Baelor, were on the cusp of adulthood, with all the realm's hopes resting upon their shoulders. On one cool autumn morning, Aemon felt a pang of nostalgia as he walked through the royal library he had helped expand. He inhaled the familiar scent of parchment and old ink, recalling how he had once pored over tomes, content in the life of a maester. Now he stood as king, reflecting on all that had transpired. The Great Council's choice, the war against Demon 3, the quiet rebellions, the various measures he had taken to improve the realm. He remembered how he had once considered joining the Night's Watch to remove himself from the line of succession entirely. A flicker of wonder rose in him. What if he had done so? What if he had refused the throne and donned the black? Would Westeros be better or worse? He suspected the realm would have suffered under a less thoughtful king, or perhaps fractured under civil war. But he also could not deny that the crown had demanded a certain harshness of him. He had sanctioned war, stripped lords of titles, imprisoned kin. He was not the same gentle scholar who had arrived in King's Landing so many years ago. The crown had changed him as it changed all who wore it. Still, for all the compromise and difficult choices, Aemon believed he had done right by the realm. He had managed to quell the fires of rebellion, help the people in times of plague and hardship, and preserve a measure of stability for the next generation. As he stood there, running a hand along the spine of a thick volume, a small smile curved his lips. The throne he had never wanted had allowed him, paradoxically, to do great good. At that moment, a page rushed in, breathless, announcing that Grand Maester Norrin requested the king's presence at once. Alarmed, Aemon closed the book. Strange shapes prowling in the forests beyond the wall, creatures that do not bleed when pierced. Aemon blinked, a chill creeping up his spine. The dead? He whispered, recalling ancient tales that he had once read in the Citadel's oldest scrolls. Norin's eyes flickered anxiously. It may be only wild tales from frightened men, but He thought of the men in black cloaks standing watch, believing in their duty, ignoring the rest of the realm's pleasures and politics. Had circumstances been slightly different, he could have been one of them, a humble brother of the watch. Instead, the Seven had placed a different duty on his shoulders, and he had accepted it. Yet in a strange, quiet way, he still belonged to the realm just as much as the watch did, serving day and night, in summer and winter until his death. And in the stillness of the night, he found a measure of peace in that purpose. Morning came, bright with a pale sun that shimmered on the Blackwater Bay. Aemon rose, dressed, and convened his council. Though the burden of kingship weighed heavy, he embraced it. He listened to advice, weighed the costs, and made his decisions. The crown would send additional men, additional supplies, to aid the night's watch. If there was even a whisper of truth to the reports, better to be prepared than to let the realm face a threat beyond imagining. Lords might grumble at the expense, but Aemon's word was final. At the end of the council meeting, he paused, remembering the younger version of himself, the uncertain man who had never dreamt of wearing a crown. He felt that old stirring of humility, but also recognized a new resolve that had blossomed over time. To rule well was to carry 1,000 concerns at once, to weigh each life, each resource, each alliance in the balance. And so he did, with the quiet determination that had first gained the realm's trust. He would continue down this path, shaping the future of Westeros to the best of his ability. If the realm needed him, he would serve, no matter the cost. In that, there was a curious echo of the vows sworn by the Night's Watch. "I am the shield that guards the realms of men." Aemon had never spoken those words before an altar, but he had lived them in his own way. And as king, he intended to keep living them until his last breath. Beyond the windows of the Red Keep, the city bustled with life, merchants haggling, children laughing, gold cloaks patrolling. Little did they know what fresh dangers might lurk in the distant north, or how fortunate they were that the man on the Iron Throne, once Maester Aemon, wielded both bookish knowledge and a heart full of duty. For now, life continued, and the small folk thrived, uncertain of the storms that might be gathering beyond the horizon. And in King's Landing, a silver-haired Targaryen in plain robes and a simple crown walked the hallways, thinking always of how he could preserve the peace, how he could guard these realms, and how he might face the darkness if ever it broke free of the legends that bound it. He had claimed his birthright before joining the Night's Watch. In doing so, he had become the shield of the realm, just as surely as if he had worn black. And though the burdens were immense and the cost dear, King Aemon Targaryen could not turn away from the destiny that he had once tried to escape. In that acceptance, he found not only the weight of the crown, but also the spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, the realm would endure and grow stronger under his care. That hope guided him forward, day by day, into the uncertain future that awaited all the 7 kingdoms.